Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Tuesday, October 30th, 2018. On today's episode, we're going to talk about what we've been up to at the water cooler. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writers Hoai-Tran Bui.
Hey, everyone.
And Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
Some people yesterday noticed that HT sounded a little different, a little bit better. It was because she was recording the stream yesterday while Ben was taking over the hosting duties. So if you're wondering why, that is why. We're trying to improve the audio all the time here on the podcast, but that's why HT sounded a little bit different yesterday. But let's dive into what we've been doing, guys. Let's talk about, what have I been doing? I've not been doing that much lately. This weekend I went to Los Angeles Comic-Con, which used to be called Stanley's Kamikaze, and I think they lost the name either because of Stanley's, the business dealing situation, or maybe they want to disassociate themselves with Stanley. I don't know. I'm not sure why, but this is a convention at the Los Angeles Convention Center, and it's actually kind of funny because they've just changed their name, and they're going to have to change it again because, as we reported on this podcast, San Diego Comic-Con won the rights to the word Comic-Con. So maybe they'll become Los Angeles Kamikaze again. But this convention I go to every year. It's fun because it happens on the weekend before Halloween, so it seems like there's usually more cosplay than normal for like a non-big, San Diego Comic-Con type convention. So there's a lot of people in their Halloween costumes and in extensive cosplay. But it's really just one of those conventions where you walk the floor and see, what kind of fun things you can buy. They have a main stage, which I think you guys would be, this is very weird. The main stage is in the convention hall, on the back side of the convention hall. So they have like rows of seats there, and then there's like kind of like a small, 6 foot high gate blocking off it, the entrance. But it's like part of the convention hall. So throughout the convention hall you can hear the main stage. It's not like San Diego Comic-Con where it's like a totally different room. It's I don't know. It's an expensive convention to go to. There isn't much to do there. I just like buying stuff and seeing all the fun, geeky stuff. The only thing I really walked away from the convention this year is I bought a t-shirt that in Guardians of the Galaxy font, or logo font, says rehire James Gunn. So that was a good purchase, I think. I also, over the weekend, got to go to some house haunts. I had never done this before. I've talked about on the podcast how I've kind of, in the last, 5 or 6 years, gotten sucked into the Halloween Horror Nights and Not Scary Farm and those kind of haunted maze events. If in most major cities, there are houses that actually put on their own haunts in their backyards. There's actually a great documentary on this by the guy that did Best Worst Movie called The Great American Scream, which I've plugged on this podcast in the past. This was my first year going to a couple. I went to a couple in Burbank, California, one called Rotten Apple 907. That one was interesting. It had almost an hour-long line going down the street, and this maze was built in the front yard of this person's house, and they do it every year, and they just do it. They do they ask, it's free, but they ask for a donation to I think it was a animal charity of some kind. And this year, every year they change their maze completely. This year it was Geppetto's workshop, but he's run out of wood and is looking for a different organic material to use, i.e., human beings. It was a lot of fun. It actually made use of there's a kid playing Pinocchio in there, which was when you go to these Halloween Horror Night events and such, it's all adults scaring you. It was kind of weird and creepy to have a kid in the maze scaring you. It had a lot of cool details and some good scares. But it's a long line. So if you're in Southern California, I think this is going until Halloween, so you might want to check this out. And I also went to another one called Backwoods Maze. And this one I would recommend more. I actually sent, Jacob, I sent you a video of this one. This one is much bigger. They do it every year, and they keep the stuff they build. Like, these guys are, like, insane craftsmen. Like, they build, like, these, like, it's very video game inspired. It's like a sci-fi junkyard in a post-apocalyptic future, I guess is the theme, because they just kind of, like, add stuff to it every year. And it has, like, these gigantic, like, bionic robots, and it's pretty insane. It also has a long line, not as long of a line, but I would say that this toxic junkyard is like on par with what I've seen at Not Scary Farm. So if you and again, it's free. If you're in Burbank, or in Southern California, you should check this out. Backwoods Maze. And what else have I been doing? I spent way too much time this week at the Magic Castle every year at Halloween time, because Magic and Halloween go together. They have this huge Halloween celebration. They theme out the castle. They basically this whole crew called the Boo Crew basically transform the castle into something else. This year they've transformed the Magic Castle into a murder mansion. So it's a murder mystery. There's actors in every one of the rooms, and when you arrive there, you're given a kind of a sheet with the clues, and you gotta there's 3 different murder mysteries, and by the end of the night, hopefully you have figured out who did it, and you can actually go to this booth and actually put in your guess, and you'll get to see how the murder played out, and if you were right, we were right. This whole experience is interesting because talking to people at this event, it was either way too complicated for those people that are like drunk and whatever, or it was way too simple. I thought it was way too complicated. It almost gets me worried for something like Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, and the interactivity that's going to have. Like, I'm sure there's going to be a part where you're like, given a mission by the Resistance, and you have to go do these things. And I feel like if they make it too complicated, it's going to be kind of I don't know. It was a little bit frustrating, I'll say, but it was fun. And I've also I posted on my Instagram. I finally completed my Scott C trilogy of great showdowns for the Avengers, which is Avengers 1, Captain America Civil War, and Avengers Infinity War, and I have framed them and hung them up on my wall. I have posted in the past, I have this whole wall of this artist Scott C does these things called great showdowns, which are basically like great showdowns from movie history or even TV or video games. He does other stuff too, but I only do the movies, and it has one person or 2 different sides. It could be one person and one person. It could be one person versus a bunch of people. It could be whatever. It could be John McClane and Glass on the other side. So so I have this whole wall of Scott C Great Showdowns, and I've been building that wall out, or expanding it rather. And the place where I used to buy my frames is this place called Aaron Brothers, which is owned by Michaels, and they recently went out of business. So now I am in the situation where I have like this whole extensive area of my place that have all of the same frame. These frames, it turns out, were made by Aaron Brothers, and Aaron Brothers no longer exists. So I'm kind of in a situation where I don't know what to do. Should I just buy a different kind of frame and then it be mismatched, or should I just stop my wall? So I wanted to ask you guys, what should I do?
I have a possible solution for you, Peter. I know that I used to also buy frames at Aaron Brothers, and in LA there is a Michaels that's in Burbank, and I think there's an Aaron Brothers that's still inside that Michaels. It's like back in the back wall, and they still sell some frames and stuff back there. I don't know if they have a limited quantity or selection, or if they're no longer manufacturing the same exact things that the whole full store used to manufacture, but you might be able to find some stuff there. But yeah, if that's not an option, I'm interested if anybody else has any alternates.
Like I'm very OCD, so I'm curious what you guys think, because like these frames are very particular. They have like a plastic frame to them, and I've looked online for frames, and they're very different looking.
All right. Here's my question, Peter. How full is the actual wall right now?
I mean, it's pretty full. I mean, it was
in that case,
it was going up the stairs at this point. It was on one wall and then going up the stairs.
Well, keep the collection. Find a new frame that you like from a different place, and when the collection turns a corner, have it turn a corner. Have a new frame series start. That way, there's a smooth transition between old frame and new frame. Problem solved.
See, I'm not anywhere near a corner though.
Well, then it sounds like you have some rearranging to do, sir.
Chris, I know you have some prints on your walls and stuff. Like, would this bother you?
It might. I've seen like photos of your walls though, and it looks like you have stuff like covering every single inch, which I don't think I could do. I think that would drive me a little more crazy.
Yeah. HT, is there any OCD there? You don't even care.
No, I don't really care. I mean, there are some prints I have that I haven't even bothered to frame just because I'm very lazy. So,
I mean, I have tons of
I'm not the
prints
best person to ask for this advice.
Yeah, I have tons of prints I have not framed, but I'm just not sure what to do. I'm gonna check out Michael's. That's a good tip, Ben, because this is literally going up 1/3 of my my stairway, so there isn't a corner in sight. Jacob. But okay, anyways, that's what I've been doing. So I've been trying to figure out the solution to that. Brad, what have you been up to?
Well, I'm in Utah right now. I have been in Utah since Saturday. I came out here to see my girlfriend for a week, so I'm here until this coming Saturday. And we're just hanging out, doing some fun stuff around town. She's showing me around. I've been out here before for Sundance and whatnot, but I've never really hung out and done stuff extensively out here. So we've been going around, just grabbing some good food. We actually even ventured up to Park City just to see what it's like when Sundance isn't happening. Right now it's considerably less snowy, which is kind of weird to see the mountains and all of Park City not covered in snow. I've only ever seen it when it's just buried under the snow that's been there during the winter preceding when Sundance begins. So we went up to Park City and stopped by headquarters and the Egyptian, which I thought the Egyptian was a theater all the time. Like, I know most of the other theaters are makeshift theaters at the high school and the library and whatnot, but I thought the Egyptian was always a movie theater. But it's actually a concert venue most of the time. And Foghat, the classic rock band, has a concert coming up there soon, or maybe just had one or something like that. So that was kind of interesting to find out.
Yeah, it's always strange to go to a place that you're usually like, I've been going to Comic-Con for I think 10 years now, and just recently, or a year or two ago, I went to San Diego when it wasn't Comic-Con. It's so strange to be at this place when it's completely different than what your experience of it is. Yeah,
for sure. I've been to San Diego when Comic-Con isn't going on either. It's very weird.
Yeah. Jacob, what have you been up to? You've been getting ready for Halloween?
Yeah, I've had a very uneventful week. Nothing exciting to talk about, except that my wife and I decided that since we have a house now, we need to have proper trick-or-treater plans, since our neighborhood has grown by leaps and bounds since last year, and we expect to get at least a few kids. So I don't know if this is a thing that's known to kids who didn't grow up in the suburbs, but I know growing up in a series of suburbs throughout my life, there's always one house in the neighborhood that gave up full-size candy bars every year, and they were the legendary house. You got there first to make sure you got your full-size candy bar. So my wife and I decided to be that house. We will be that legend, and we went and bought a bunch of full-size candy bars.
Yes.
So kids will know us. We will be the legends of the neighborhood.
But did you get good full-size candy bars? That's the question.
Oh yeah, we got a mixture of everything. There's a couple different packages of all the different varieties. So I think everybody will be pleased. There'll be something for everyone.
Yeah. So you're gonna let the people pick out which one they want?
Of course. I'm not a Halloween Nazi, Peter. I let the kids choose.
I wish I had a house. I live in a condo, and I wish I had a house because I would totally be that house on the block that decks out their front yard with all huge Halloween decorations. Have you done that this year?
Nothing extreme yet. We actually went and hit some Halloween clearance and got a bunch of stuff really cheap. So we're actually going to hang some stuff tonight. We got a projector. It's going to project like ghostly images all over our house. So nothing like all out. Like my brother, for example, I went to a Halloween party at his house where he had like bloody satanic scarecrows he had made, like a staged hit and run on his driveway with a dead body, like all kinds of music playing from hidden speakers. Like he goes all out. We just have a few, fun little decorations, but maybe next year. Maybe next year I'll try to do something a little more extreme.
Ben, what have you been up to?
So my wife and I went to a Halloween party / baby shower over the weekend, and it was sort of like a
how does that work?
Well, my friends are my friend and his wife are about to have a baby, and they just love Halloween, and they're just decided to combine the two celebrations. So it was basically just like wear a costume to come celebrate the fact that we're having a baby, and they did gifts and the whole deal. They had some fun games and stuff like that there, but it was basically just an excuse for everybody to hang out and for grown adults to wear costumes together in the middle of the day. So it was fun. I dressed up as the horrifying mutant bear from Annihilation, which, by the way, that bear actually has a name. Does anybody know what that bear's name is?
Kevin.
It's not Kevin.
If anybody knows the name, it has to be Chris. Chris, do you know the name?
I forgot. I remember I read an article about it in Entertainment Weekly, and I already forgot it.
Yeah, the bear's name is Hoai-Tran, and the reason for that is that Andrew Whitehurst was the visual effects supervisor for both Annihilation and Paddington, and Paddington obviously is named after Paddington Station.
Amazing.
In London, and there's sort of like he called it a slightly rough around the edges station nearby that is a rail station in East London called Hoai-Tran, so that's why they named the bear from Annihilation Hoai-Tran. I had like 2 skull masks, and my wife Amy did this amazing job of cutting them up and sort of using all this prop glue and stuff to glue them together, where I basically was wearing 2 skulls. You can see a picture of it on my Twitter and Instagram if you want to look, but
we'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's pretty horrifying, and I isolated the sound clips from the movie where the bear is screaming with a human voice, and I had that on my phone as a song, so I would just play it, sometimes throughout the party when I was trying to mess with people. And there were a few kids there, and they were appropriately terrified of me, so I kind of felt a little bad about that, because they were toddlers who would just look up at me in sheer terror. So, but you gotta scare them early, I guess.
Yeah, you got to get them in the Halloween spirit. HD, what have you been up to?
Now I'm just imagining like a Paddington Annihilation crossover in which maybe they're long lost cousins. Anyways, I also went to a sort of combination party when I went to New York this weekend. So I went up to the city to check out my new apartment and sign for it, which I'm very excited for. I'm moving in about 2 weeks. And while I was there, I attended my friend's housewarming party, which doubled as a Halloween party. Just by coincidence, my friend happened to live like 10 minutes away from where my new apartment is, so it was very exciting as well. And I dressed up as the 13th Doctor. Only one person knew who I was, but she was very excited to see that I was dressed as that. And I was kind of like a bargain bin version of the 13th Doctor, because I just kind of cobbled together a bunch of clothing items I already had, and then used my 11th Doctor sonic screwdriver because I didn't want to buy the new one, or didn't have time to buy the new one just yet. But I was very proud of my costume, and I spent a lot of the night just excitedly talking about Doctor Who with the one friend who did recognize the costume. It was fun, and I got to see my neighborhood, which I hadn't got a chance to because my roommate, who I'm moving in with, is my college roommate, and she had checked out the place beforehand. But this is my first time seeing the place in the neighborhood firsthand, and it's really sweet. It's a neighborhood in Sunnyside in Queens. I think I talked about this a little bit before on the podcast. Yes, I will be in Spider-Man's neighborhood. Actually, we went to a diner that had Spider-Man on the menu, so I think that they're definitely leaning into that connection as well.
They need a statue, just like
they do.
Whatchamacallit has the Steve Rogers statue. I'm very interested in this because this is like a big move, HT, and
Yes.
you had never visited this place. Like, you just we're like, yeah, sure, that sounds like a good neighborhood.
Well, we FaceTimed. So she FaceTimed when we were looking at the apartment, so I got a good view of it through her phone. But, being there is a little bit different than seeing it through a phone. But I was confident in her. I trusted her judgment, and I was very happy with the choice, too. So, yeah, it was my first time seeing it, so it could have been a gamble, but it wasn't, thankfully.
Well, very cool. We're excited to hear about your big move to New York and actually learn about all the cool, geeky stuff in New York. But let's move on to what we've been reading. Jacob, what have you been reading?
I've been picking through 2 new encyclopedia-style books. The first of which is the Super Mario Brothers Encyclopedia that Nintendo just released, published by Dark Horse. And I was pretty excited to read this or flip through it because I've bought Dark Horse's 3 Legend of Zelda encyclopedias that go into the history of the game and its art and the lore within the game itself, or the game series itself. And they're these beautiful books, worth every penny. I love them, and I love how they explore both the game world and the creation of the game world. And I'm a little let down on my Super Mario Bros. Encyclopedia. It's not as good, it's not as comprehensive. It's not something you can pick up and flip through and just read through and have a good time like the Zelda books. It is very much an encyclopedia. It is very much a collection of all the little miscellaneous tidbits you ever want to know about the Mario series from the very first game up until this year.
Does it talk about Donkey Kong? Because I know Mario started in Donkey Kong.
No, it starts with Super Mario Brothers. It gives Donkey Kong there's a chapter of other games Mario has appeared in. And gives a notice to the Donkey Kong there, but in terms of actual official full-fledged chapters, breaking down minutia of every single game, it begins with the original Super Mario Brothers for NES. It's a cool book. It's well designed. If you want to open up a page and find a complete listing with images of every single enemy in every single Super Mario Bros. Game by divided by game, it's useful. It's a useful thing to have. I'm happy to have it on my shelf, but it is not like.
I have another question for you, Jacob.
Yeah.
Does it have Super Mario Brothers 2 that was released in Japan until we got it as part of that that collection? I forget what that collection was.
Yep, it has that. It pretty much has all the core Mario games, both Japanese and American ones. Pretty much all the main core games. I'm not sure if it covers the Mario parties other than maybe a footnote, but all the main games are covered in extensive detail that is really fun to reference and not fun to read through. So it's the kind of thing if you want a reference guide, a handy reference guide, that's what this is. And it's a really cool thing. It's pretty cheap on Amazon now. It's only $23 for a $40 book. And if you're a big Mario Brothers fan, it's a really cool thing to have. It just don't expect to sit down and read a lush history of the Mario Brothers series. But the exact opposite of this is a new book called Dungeons & Dragons Art and Arcana. This is a book written by Michael Whitwer, Kyle Newman, John Peterson, and Sam Whitwer. And it is what it is, what the title says it is. It is a complete history of Dungeons & Dragons told through its visual history. And it is comprehensive. It is a heavy book. It's a dense book full of photographs and art and lots and lots of text taking you through the entire history of D&D from its earliest inspirations all the way up to today, more or less. And I'm a big RPG fan, as I've noted on this podcast before. I love role-playing games. And even though I'm not the biggest D&D fan, I think there are systems I prefer. It is just a cultural touchstone for this corner of the world. And this book is just comprehensive. I'm digging through it and having a great time with it. There's so much to learn, so much to see. It explores what influenced D&D, what D&D has influenced, and everything in between. And unlike the Mario book, it's a book you can actually pick up and read and really enjoy and dig into. It is a full meal of a book. It's a lot more expensive. It's $50 normally, $34 on Amazon right now. But if you're a fan of D&D, or if you're even just a fan of fantasy and want to understand the impact that the fantasy genre has gone through since the creation of this game, it is a really riveting and very cool book.
See, I'm not a fan of fantasy or D&D, but I am friends with Kyle Newman, so I got this book, Jacob, and I've been looking through it, and it's a wonderful coffee table book. You can just have this on your coffee table for people that are, just to look through. There's just some great art and some great stuff in there.
Jacob, has it inspired you? Are you still a dungeon master? Do you still host your own game?
Yeah, I try to. Like I said, I don't host a lot of D&D. I attend a D&D game as a player, But for my hosting time, I prefer other systems. Like there are game systems that I prefer hosting far more than D&D. But D&D is still, it's the go-to. It's the one that people know the most, the one that gets most people into the hobby, and it's the one that is doing better now than it's ever done in the past. So has
this book given you any inspiration for like the way that you can approach different things? Like reading all of that history, has it like I guess given you any like different approaches or like new ideas for ways to participate in the story?
I wouldn't say anything extreme. Like it's like I said, it's just a lot of D&D art, a lot of dragons, a lot of castles, a lot of knights fighting monsters. So there's nothing in here that like struck me in a way that said, oh, that inspires how I'm going to run a Dungeon World game, which is a game system I prefer if you like this kind of game.
It's interesting to see like the early days of D&D and like how like the dungeon master had to have a piece of graph paper to graph out like the dungeon and where everybody was and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really cool history thing. I mean, there are actual guides and books about game design, about running games, and about how to work with players that I find more useful for getting inspiration and for becoming a better DM. But for pop culture history, for like an artifact that's going to explore how this came to be and how it was built from a historical perspective, it's extremely useful. But I can't say it gave me inspiration, but it is a very cool book nonetheless.
Cool.
Okay, let's move on to what we've been watching. I'll start things off. I showed Kitra The Conjuring for the first time. She had not seen it. She had just watched The Haunting of Hill House, and we had gone to the Conjuring haunted house on the Warner Brothers Horror Made Here event. So she was interested in it, and she loved it. And it's I don't know. The Conjuring's just so good. I'm not usually a fan of, exorcisms and people taking over other bodies and that kind of stuff. But I guess the movie doesn't get into that until very later. It's just so well executed. I'm just such a fan of what James does with this movie and how, he kind of shows you the entire layout of this house in like this breathtaking one shot. And I don't know, it's just such a good movie. But we were also on a kind of horror kick, so we had on demand. We had Eli Roth is doing this series on AMC called The History of Horror, and this is basically just him interviewing people. I guess it's kind of like what James Cameron did was The History of Sci-Fi. So it's him interviewing like all these big people from Stephen King to filmmakers to, Jamie Lee Curtis, whatever. And we were just watching the 2 episodes that are the history of the slasher movies, which is, I don't know. I know it's made for general audiences. It's made for, cable TV. So it's like, you can't get too deep into it because I think it's like an hour-long episode each, so it's spending only 2 hours on the history of slasher films is a very condensed thing to do, but it was enjoyable, and it kind of hit some itches, and I actually want to go revisit the Scream films. Chris, have you watched any of these episodes?
I have not, because I really don't like Eli Roth, so that's what's turning me off checking it out.
Actually, I'll tell you. Actually, Eli Roth's presence is not nearly as prominent as James Cameron's was in the other AMC Visionary series. Yeah. He appears in some roundtable discussion, like when they're talking about stuff here and there, but he's not doing interviews with the subjects in the same way that James Cameron did in the sci-fi version. So I think you can get by with watching it, and even with your distaste for Eli Roth.
All right, then yeah, maybe I will check it out now that I know that.
Yeah, I would check it out. I don't think it's going to tell you anything you don't know, but it has some, good people like Edgar Wright, giving commentary on some of these films that he loved. And, Eli Roth, I think he only does some voiceover stuff, and then he's maybe in like 5% of the overall thing. But it's enjoyable. We also started watching The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina on Netflix. So this is an adaptation of the Archie comic Sabrina, the Teenage Witch. This is not the Sabrina that you knew from, what was that, Nickelodeon show?
No, it's ABC.
ABC. Yeah, this is a more adult version of it. It's the the actress who played Sally from Mad Men. I don't have her name in front of me.
Kiernan Shipka.
Yeah, and you know what? The production design, the art design, the costume design. This show looks fantastic. It's an interesting update. It very much seems like it has influences from Harry Potter, like very obvious influences. And I've only watched one episode. I'm going to keep on watching. It's not great, but it's good. And it's definitely, it doesn't feel like, the CW. Not to not to disparage Riverdale, but it feels more like a Netflix show than it does a CW show. Have any of you guys seen this show yet?
Well, I have. Yeah, I have, because I reviewed it for us, and I talked about it before. And I agree. It's good, not great. The production value is fantastic, but some of the writing and the acting is not as good as it could be.
HT, have you seen anything?
No, I'm planning to watch it, though, because I am a fan of Riverdale. At least I kind of am. I haven't caught up with season 2. But I've been really interested in watching this. I just haven't had, I guess, the time to see it yet.
And we started watching The Sinner season 1. I talked a few weeks back about watching The Sinner season 2. This is an anthology series that's on USA Network. It basically tells... in the first, few minutes of an episode, you see this, horrific crime happen, and it's basically them trying to figure out why it happened for the whole season. Season 2 was a lot more compelling than season 1 thus far. Season 1 is a little bit slower. I don't know, and it's also weird. It seems to be more obsessed with sex. I don't know. It's I'm not sure if we're gonna make it through all of season 1, but I would highly recommend The Sinner season 2 on USA Network. You can watch it on demand. You don't have to watch season 1 to get into season 2. And I should also mention that one of my friends who I went to the haunts this weekend with, Joe, mentioned that he's a big listener of this podcast. He, of course, loves HT and Chris. So there you go.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I guess, Chris, what have you been watching?
I finally caught up on 2 films from this year that I just hadn't had a chance to see yet. One was Incredibles 2, which I thought was okay. I mean, visually it's fantastic. There's some action stuff in this film that is incredible, and that's not so shocking, just because Brad Bird is pretty much very well known for his very action-packed animation, and the way the camera, quote unquote, the camera moves over shots as characters are running around and stuff. I was really impressed with that, but the story itself didn't do that much for me. I'm one of those weirdos who doesn't think the first Incredibles is like the best Pixar movie ever. I usually see people say that, and it isn't. I don't even think it's in like my top 5 of Pixar films, but I do like it. I don't love it, so maybe that's why I wasn't as blown away by this as some people think it is. But it is what it is. I thought it's probably because he's aging a bit, but I thought Craig T. Nelson's voice sounded very frail, and that really distracted me. Like, it just sounded like this old man's voice coming out of Mr. Incredible, and that just seemed really weird to me.
See, I was more bothered by Mrs. Incredible's voice. Like, it sounded so much different to me.
Really? I thought that sounded the same. I thought Holly Hunter pretty much sounds the same now as she sounded her whole career. I don't know.
But your opinion in this movie kind of reflects me and Ben. I know Brad. Jacob, were you a huge fan of this film?
Yeah, I like it quite a bit. I mean, I'm not sure if I like it as much as the first one, but I think it's really good.
Yeah, and I know Brad was a huge fan of this sequel. Brad, just as a counterpoint, what did Chris, Ben, and I miss? Like, what are we missing?
I mean, we've talked about this before. I feel like, I don't know, maybe you just weren't invested in, I don't know, the characters as much this time. Maybe too much time has passed. For me, I found a lot to like about how the dynamic of the family shifted even in such a short period of time, like I feel like the kids have to take a little bit more responsibility. I think Mr. Incredible still has lessons to learn. Like the first movie was all about, him realizing that he can't be the hero that he used to be. And this one is like, he can't, do everything by himself, but it's in a different way. And so some people have criticized the movie for having the same kind of, I guess, lesson for, Mr. Incredible to learn that you thought he learned in the first one. But I think it's different this time because it's much more family centric. And yeah, I don't know. I liked it. And I like Chris said, the action in this movie is incredible. There's some action in this movie that I think rivals some of the biggest, expensive tent poles. It's so well crafted.
No, I agree with you on the action point. Chris, you also finally got to see Sorry to Bother You?
Yes, I did. And that was good. I don't think I loved it as much as everyone else did. Like when people first saw it at Sundance, it seemed like this sea change where it was like the most revolutionary movie ever made. And it's definitely one of the year's best films. It's definitely as crazy as I heard it was, because there's this, third act twist that I don't think anyone will see coming if they, go into this movie cold. But I thought it was like maybe 10 or 15 minutes too long. Like it started to sort of drag in the middle and started to keep like repeating itself. But for being Boots Riley's like first feature film, this is pretty amazing that this is like the first feature he made, and he more or less knocked it out of the park right away. It's definitely one of the year's most unique films, and I liked how unapologetically political it was. Like the trailers sold it as pretty much this wacky comedy, and it has comedy in it, but it's a lot more political, a lot more social commentary than a lot of the marketing let on. So I really appreciated that.
For sure. And Jacob, you finally finished The Haunting of Hill House.
Yeah, last week I only watched the first episode. I wasn't sold yet, but since then I've watched the entire series, and I think it may be my new favorite show of the year. I think it's more or less perfect from beginning to end. I take issue with it being called The Haunting of Hill House, since it does stray so far from the source novel, but it's so good at being what it actually is, which is a incredibly nuanced and heartbreaking and realistic portrait of family dysfunction, except where the source of that dysfunction is an incredibly scary haunted house they all grew up in. And so the flashbacks to their childhood, where they're just being haunted by these really malicious ghosts, and then the modern day scenes where they deal with their baggage, they eventually combine, but they work together separately so well. Like I was equally invested in both timelines. And Mike Flanagan, who directed the whole series and ran the writer's room, I've been a fan of his for a long time now. He did Gerald's Game and Oculus and Hush, and this is very much his voice. I mean, it's his brand of jump scares, very effective. His type of mood, his attention to character detail, and his sentimentality. I mean, the conclusion of the show is actually very positive in a weird way, and very life affirming for a show that's so full of death and family dysfunction, and that plays out in a lot of his movies, sometimes to a fault, but it works here. And I'll leave it here and say episode 6, which is shot in only a handful of very long shots, should be a gimmick, and it should play like a gimmick, but it's actually just flat out intense and upsetting, and it fluctuates between haunted house, Spookablast in the past, and really, really upsetting, unsettling family reunion in the present, all in a handful of shots, like fluctuating between times, and breaking the bounds of physicality with the camera moving back and forth through time without like cuts. And it's just a remarkable thing to watch. And I know they have not announced season 2 yet, and if they do, it'll follow different characters, but as like a standalone 10-hour full meal, like I feel completely satisfied. It's everything I wanted out of a 10-episode horror series.
See, I'm upset with myself because I watched the first episode and I was like, this is not for me. And my girlfriend Kitra ended up watching the rest of the show and had the same reaction as you, that this is her favorite show of this year. So now I feel like the dumbass who didn't. I don't know. Maybe I'm gonna have to give this a try because that first episode just was not anything I cared about.
It's a little table setting there. They're kind of like letting you in slowly. I'd say by episode 3, which is each of the first 5 episodes is a focus around one character, And each character, as you go in, is a character who's essentially had a worse and worse experience in the house. So the first 5 episodes go from being the oldest son who's kind of like, the house wasn't bad. It was just a spooky house, to the 5th episode where the character had like the absolute hellish experience that destroys her life. So the first 5 episodes kind of lure you into letting you know just how bad things are episode by episode. So maybe give another 1 or 2 and see if it grows on you.
And just from a cinematography perspective, I'm so interested in the episode 6. I've heard so many people talk about it, and I love one shots, and I love what Sam Esmail did last season with Mr. Robot. They did a whole episode in like, one seamlessly edited together one take. So maybe I'm gonna have to give it a try. And you've also been watching more of ER, which you've been talking about.
Non-stop ER. This is my weekly ER update. I think we have to start talking at least a few sentences about ER every week just to let you know where I am. And I'm nearing the end of season 7. And Peter, I have strong opinions on season 7. This is where I was warned that season 6 is where the show kind of climaxes and stops being the golden age of ER, and I wonder what that meant. And now, deep into season 7, I now know what it means to be in the silver age of ER as opposed to the golden age. And that means a lot more bombast, a lot more massive plot lines, a lot more massive disasters hitting the hospital every episode. I really enjoy the early seasons because they're so mundane. Like, the big disasters happen once or twice a season, and so much of the episodes deal with the mundanity of working in ER, of how frustrating and sad and tragic it can be, but also how funny and weird and thrilling it can be. Whereas now, every episode has to have a massive tragedy or a massive plot line or a shootout in the ER waiting room or a disaster of some kind that wreaks havoc in everybody's lives. And when the show slows down, it's so good. Like, there's an episode where main character has brain surgery and treats it as like a genuinely terrifying experience, and it really kind of buckles down and lets you into his headspace, and it's a really, really good TV. And the show is still totally watchable, but I can definitely see why this is where the show stopped being like must-see TV back in the day and started being just an old favorite, as opposed to being a thing that was actually driving what TV could be at the time.
See, I'm so jealous of what you're doing with ER. Is like, I'm in the place that I'm, in peak TV where I'm watching, binge watching through a season of TV, and then going on to the next season of TV I can binge watch through. And I want to be able to go find something that has, a bunch of different seasons and actually sit down for a bunch of weeks and make my way through that one TV entity. But ER does not interest me in the least.
You know what series you could do, Peter?
What?
Doctor Who.
Doctor Who, I know. Yeah.
But you know what, Peter? I would recommend at least watching the pilot for ER, and here's why. Because it was written as a screenplay by Michael Crichton, the author of Jurassic Park. And the pilot still plays like a 90-minute movie. It's a 90-minute TV pilot. And it was going to be directed by Steven Spielberg. And they shot it as a pilot almost unchanged from the film script. So it could be fun as an experiment to watch just a 90-minute pilot and imagine it as a theatrically released Spielberg movie, as opposed to the TV pilot, and just to see if you like it and just to do that thought game. And if you don't like it, you don't watch it anymore and have that knowledge. But if you do like it, maybe it'll grow on you.
That's interesting. Jacob, is the initial seasons of ER shot in HD, or is that standard definition 4:3?
They were cropped to 4:3 for initial broadcast, but the version on Hulu have been restored to full widescreen. They were shot widescreen, cropped for TV, and now they've been so everything's now widescreen now. It looks really good. I mean, it was shot in film back in the day, so it holds up.
Maybe I'll have to check it out, because I do have a problem with that, and I did kind of give up on West Wing and going back and watching those initial seasons in standard definition. I just can't make my way through it. It's just, I don't know. I feel like one of those assholes who's like, I can't watch a black and white movie because it's in black and white, but I don't know. It just looks like video I don't know. But yeah, maybe I'll give it a try. Brad, what have you been watching lately?
Not much, but I did take the time to watch something on my flight over here to Utah. A friend of mine told me that the new Adam Sandler Netflix special was actually funny, and I was like, So I downloaded it. I downloaded it and put it on my iPad. And coming from somebody who has disliked pretty much all Adam Sandler comedies post Big Daddy, and has really only enjoyed his turns in things like Punch Drunk Love and Spanglish since then, I just I don't know, didn't think Adam Sandler really could be funny again or anything like that. But this stand-up special is surprisingly good. It is full of all new stuff. It's a mix of him doing stand-up and doing some of his goofy original songs that he used to do on Saturday Night Live. It has the spirit of the comedy albums that he put out in the 90s. It's definitely got a little bit of immaturity to it for sure, as Adam Sandler always has, but it's surprisingly funny. I found myself really enjoying it, and there's even a part towards the end that I actually teared up because the one of the songs he does is really touching, and it's just fantastic. I was supremely impressed with the stand-up special, and it really feels like it's some of the energy that he brought to Funny People that made him so good in that movie. And I wish he would keep doing stuff like this and try and channel this into making better movies, because like if he can do stuff like this, I don't know why he's not putting more effort into making better comedies.
So if you had to give this a rating from 1% freshness to 100% freshness, how fresh is this special?
I would probably give it like a 90% fresh, I would say.
So you should have called it 90% fresh.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Ben, what have you been watching?
I've been watching a bunch of stuff. I caught up with Streets of Fire, the 1984 movie directed by Walter Hill. Has anybody ever seen this film?
It's one of the least boring movies ever made. It's so good. I love this movie, Ben.
That is a really, really great way of describing it. I had never seen this before. I think I saw a trailer like 5 years ago, and I added it to my Netflix queue, the disc queue, and it finally arrived in the mail, and I was like, oh yeah, Streets of Fire, I guess I need to check this out. And this movie is kind of nuts. It's a mixture of like the Marlon Brando movie, The Wild One, but also like through this like rain-soaked like 1980s musical action comedy kind of lens. It's so many genres thrown into one thing. Willem Dafoe plays the bad guy, and it's one of the rare times I've ever seen a young Willem Dafoe, and it's kind of unnerving to see. Diane Lane is in it. Rick Moranis is in it. A young Amy Madigan. I mean, the cast is pretty good, except for Michael Paré, who was like the lead guy. I was not really a big fan of his performance, but stylistically, this movie is all over the place. Like I mentioned, it's this huge mishmash of genres, and it's like this guy. It's like a lot of. It's almost like they tried to make. Like how like Raiders of the Lost Ark is inspired by old school serials. It's a movie. Streets of Fire is a movie that feels like it's inspired by, I don't know, like some long lost art form that Walter Hill just discovered one day and was like, we have to make we have to adapt this into a movie because it's unlike anything I've ever seen. They call it a rock and roll fable in the opening credits, and they say it takes place in another time, another place, and it really feels like that. It's the kind of movie that I wish I would have seen when I was 10, because I feel like it would have really gotten into my bones and like formed who I was as a person back then. Because when you're a young film fan and you find something so unique, or at least speaking for me anyway, I used to like latch on to stuff like that and really, let it sink in. And this movie feels like that to me. I don't really know if I would say it's a great movie, but at the same time, I have to admire the audacity of it. And I wish stuff like this would come out more all the time. I mean, watching it now, it seems impossible that a movie like this would ever be made in today's risk-averse Hollywood, but there's a lot to enjoy here if you're a fan of just having your jaw on the floor at the fact that crazy stuff like this was made. Does anybody else have anything to say about Streets of Fire?
That Jim Steinman soundtrack is amazing. All the Jim Steinman songs, I have them on loop in my car sometimes. They're so good. It's just, Ben, I'm so glad you saw this movie. It's one of my favorites. And Walter Hill had a whole series planned. He wanted to make it into a franchise of movies, and the first one bombed so badly that Walter Hill never made a big budget movie again. But it is as far from reality as Lord of the Rings, but it's still set in like a city full of bikers, but with Western tropes and Meatloaf-esque songs and power ballads and neon lights and rain and so much rain.
Yeah.
Oh God, Ben, I'm so thrilled you brought this movie up.
You guys are making me want to watch this so bad. I've never seen this film.
Man, like the entire thing is shot on a backlot, and it looks and feels like it, and a lot of times to me that's like a negative thing. Like it sort of feels like it's doing the movie an injustice, but it's perfect for this movie for some reason. It's so strange. Chris, what do you think about Streets of Fire?
Yeah, I don't think I can add anything more than what you just said. It's made right from the start. Like if I was sort of in the same boat as you, as I had never seen it, and then a few years ago I watched it, and literally as it just starts with that first song, and I was immediately like, oh, this is the best movie ever made. Like this movie has, like I'm 2 minutes into this, and I can already tell I'm going to love this movie, and it just gets better from there. And I love that Rick Moranis is in it playing like a serious character, even though he's wearing like a goofy bow tie. It's just such a strange, entertaining movie, and I wish, like you said, the only thing I don't like about it is the lead guy is really dull, and I wish like they had recast that part, because then it would be even better. But beyond that, this movie is incredible.
Also, I saw The Mummy from 1959. This is the British movie, not the original Universal Pictures one. This was just on TCM, and I had never seen it, so I DVR'd it and watched it with my wife. And I was excited because I saw that it starred Christopher Lee, and Christopher Lee plays the Mummy. And the bad news is that he's so buried under scrolls and whatever mummy paraphernalia he has to wear that that you don't really get much Christopher Lee out of this film, which was a real shame, because I being a fan of his, I was hoping to see him sort of let loose, but he's very restrained and there's not really much of him there. You do get a good lead performance from Peter Cushing, who I know primarily from Star Wars, and this was one of the first things I think that I'd seen him in outside of that. I'm sure I've seen him in a couple things here and there, but this was like one of the first movies that I've seen where he was like the pure lead of the film. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's an interesting timepiece, and I know that a lot of these British horror movies have a special place in a lot of people's hearts, but coming to it so late and not being as impressed with with Christopher Lee's work as I was hoping to be in it, or at least the characterization, not necessarily his work. He did what he could with this role, but I don't know. I feel like maybe it might just be better to skip this one entirely and just go back to the 1932 version. Jacob, I know you're a big fan of like the Hammer films and Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing in this whole era. What do you think about this version of The Mummy? Have you seen this one?
Yeah, I think it's okay. I think the problem is that this was from a time period when Christopher Lee was a bit embarrassed to be making horror movies. Like famously, he asked to have most of his dialogue as Dracula removed from the script because he was embarrassed to say it, which actually leads to his Dracula being this monstrous figure who doesn't speak and it becomes important to how he plays him. But yeah, this was from an era where Christopher Lee hasn't quite embraced being Christopher Lee that we know and love quite yet. He's partially there. But yeah, I think this isn't as good as other Hammer movies from around this era. You'll find better Cushing and Lee movies. I mean, it's totally fine, but in terms of mummy movies, the Universal one is still my favorite.
Yeah, and I actually even like the Brendan Fraser one better than this, which may be sacrilege to some people, but I find a lot to enjoy with that Stephen Sommers movie from like the late 90s. But and then also I started Maniac. I think I'm 7 episodes into that show, the Cary Fukunaga show with Emma Stone and Jonah Hill. This is one of the only TV shows that I've watched without knowing really anything about it other than the people that are involved. And I have to say that is like the ideal way for me to watch the show, because without knowing anything about the premise even, going in and being sucked into this world has been kind of an amazing experience. It's like one of my favorite TV experiences so far this year, just because I have no idea what's going to happen next. It's one of those shows where the genres hop around so much and you're not entirely sure what's real the whole time, but the style of it, the production design, the look, the acting, I mean, I'm a huge fan of pretty much everything that I've seen so far. Like I said, I think I have like 3 episodes left until it's over, and it's supposed to be just a limited series, so I don't think it's going to be coming back for a second season. But if you somehow have not seen anything or heard anything about Maniac, I would definitely recommend it. I'm hoping that it sticks the landing, because I've really enjoyed everything that I've seen through the first 7 episodes.
See, that's another series I give up on, not because like everything you're saying I agree with, Ben. Like the world building is amazing, the acting, the production design, it's all incredible, but it's like such a weird, off-putting story and character. Like I just wasn't finding my grip on it.
How far into it did you get?
I think we only watched 2 episodes.
Okay, yeah. I mean, once you start getting into, I think 3, 4, 5, that's when it starts really changing genres and playing with the form in interesting ways. And I don't know, I guess I was just hooked on the characters a little bit earlier. And if you're not, I can totally see how you would want to tap out. But I don't know. I'm not sure if I can convince you to go back and continue, especially when you have all these other things to watch, Peter. But for anybody else listening out there, I would say Maniac is definitely worth watching. And then very briefly, I just wanted to mention last night I saw a screening of Barry Jenkins' new movie, If Beale Street Could Talk. And this film is totally gorgeous. I mean, it's completely heartbreaking, the story that it tells. I don't even want to talk about the story, the premise, just in case you're able to go into it fresh and not know anything. But it's very clear to me that, having watched like movies like In the Mood for Love, it seems like that kind of that sumptuous visual style was very influential for Barry Jenkins here. And it is like one of the most gorgeously shot films that you'll see this year. I think this movie is like, it's sensual in a way that American films often are not. And it kind of took me by surprise in that way, but it's so human and real and tragic, and the performances are all great. I mean, I think it's one of my favorite movies of this year, even though it's kind of difficult to watch at times. And there's a lot to talk about with this film. So I hope everybody gets a chance to see it, so we can have maybe a longer discussion about it later on.
Very cool. And HT, what have you been watching?
So I got a chance to see Suspiria this weekend because it was playing in select theaters in New York, and it expands wide later this weekend. But this is a movie that I felt fundamentally changed coming out of, I guess you could say. It's something that I felt like I needed to sit with, but at the same time, it's so revolting and grotesque in so many ways that I didn't want to let it marinate in my mind too much for fear of it just like damaging me. It is interesting because I saw the original Suspiria in like my college film class several years ago, and that was a movie that really transfixed me just because of how visually gorgeous and stunning it was. And this was also before I became a horror fan. I didn't really see it as a horror film in a sense. I saw it as this really beautiful, really disturbing in a ways, like European art house film. And this Luca Guadagnino's film is nothing at all like it. It's this incredibly bleak reversal of Dario Argento's movie that is more like loosely inspired by it rather than being a remake. And it has a very different approach that I still have yet to make heads or tails of. It's definitely a film that you want to just sit with a little bit before you make your final judgment. I'm not even sure if I really liked it. I was like, okay, this is a film. This is an experience. It's definitely an experience, and it's interesting too because it kind of has a similar like narrative momentum as, for example, last year's very divisive Mother, in that the first 2/3 are very slow and the action doesn't really kick into gear until like halfway through the film, and then the last third just completely goes off the rails in a way that I really appreciated. But I just I don't know what to make of it overall. I think that people should go see it because it's definitely unlike a lot of films that you'll see out in theaters today. But I want to know, like, has anyone else here seen it?
Yeah, I know Chris and I have. I know I've spoken on the podcast during our Fantasy Fest coverage about it, and I think it's one of the best movies of the year, but it's also a film I've been grappling with because it is challenging by design. But Chris, have you talked about this on the podcast today? I want to hear your thoughts.
I might have talked about it. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat where this movie is pretty insane. It is a lot like Mother in that I can tell people are either going to really like this or they're going to like hate it with the fire of 1,000 suns. Like I can tell that this is not going to be a movie for everyone. I really liked it. Just the skill on display here. I love the way it's edited. Like the first hour or so is filled with these really, really quick cuts that are not like most movies a day, where it's literally like a cut like every few seconds to different angles, and it can be jarring if you're not used to that. but it worked really well for me. And the last like half hour is just pure madness, just over the top madness. And again, I know there are going to be people who really loathe this movie. Like they're going to walk out and be like, that's the worst movie I've ever seen. But for me, it worked. It worked really well. And it's going to be on my best of list somewhere. I'm just not sure where yet.
I was actually really fascinated because I saw it in a packed theater and there were no walkouts, even though there are several times where I'm sure I could feel the audience around me just being like, what is going on? But everyone stayed and everyone just kind of like nervously clapped at the end too. They're all in. And I'm interested to see like how this plays when it goes wide, because it's definitely just a very challenging film, like Jacob said. And to go off what Chris was saying too, Luca Guadagnino plays with like his cuts and his editing in a way that Argento played with color. This really bold and just weird technique that is so memorable. There are a lot of threads that I'm not sure work together, but like there's a whole political subplot which I was kind of confused as. But overall, I will say I think I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I would actually recommend Googling the German Autumn before you go see Suspiria if you aren't familiar with Berlin in 1977, because I had to do some research after the fact to appreciate what the movie's getting at. Because the original movie is set in 1977 by default, and in Germany because that's just where it's set. So in this one actually says, what was life actually like in Germany in 1977? It actually ingrains those politics into the plot in a way that requires some homework to fully appreciate. So that's the kind of movie it is. And if that sounds like fun, then you will like this movie.
I'm so fearing that I'm not going to like this movie, and I think I'm just going to avoid it, guys. I think it's best for everybody involved to avoid this movie. But, we've gotten to the point in the podcast where we find out, what has Brad been eating this week?
I've been eating some great things because I'm in Utah, and my lovely girlfriend Brittany has been showing me around to some hot spots. We stopped by this amazing place for brunch called Five Seeds, which is over in Park City. It's actually close to where the liquor store is that we hit up when we get together for the blogger party, and we go to the one place where they actually have hard liquor in Park City. Wait.
So do you eat the 5 varieties of seeds that you get to choose from?
That's exactly what it is. It's just seeds, and you just eat 5 different seeds. That's it. It's underwhelming. So sorry about that. No, it is.
I was in shock here.
No, it is. It's Australian owned. Apparently, this couple from Melbourne runs it, and they're very well known for their brunch, and that's what we went there for. And so we got pulled pork Benedict, which was absolutely heavenly, and then we split this Tim Tam French toast. If you've ever had Tim Tams, they're this British, I think it's British anyway, or maybe it is Australian, but it's this a biscuit, if you or cookie for Americans, that is covered in chocolate, and they have different flavors of it. And so they made French toast, and they put Tim Tam on it, and then they had this chocolate kind of like frosting on it, and it was everything here was so good. And one thing that's cool about it is because it's also Australian owned, they also have different flavors of Bundaberg soda. Bundaberg is also an Australian-owned soda company, and you can find Bundaberg ginger beer here in the United States at certain stores, but it's not the easiest thing to find necessarily, and they have a bunch of fruit flavors that you can't get in the United States unless you pay a lot to import it. But since this place is Australian-owned, they had the guava flavor and the peach flavor, so I got a peach Bundaberg while I was there, and that was fantastic as well. So it's if we have time, actually, when we go to Sundance in January, we should make a stop there for a meal, because it's definitely worth stopping. It's so good.
Very cool. Have you been trying any weird, flavored stuff this week?
I have. Well, before I get to that though, I also went to a place called Waffle Love, which, as you might guess, is known for its great waffles. And they had spectacular chicken waffles, and then we also had one that it's a banana cream pie waffle, where the inside of the waffle has chocolate in it, and then there's a bunch of banana slices and whipped cream on top, and it's just amazing. It's easily the best waffles that I've had, and their chicken was phenomenal too. They have this great chicken dipping sauce that's kind of like fry sauce, but a little bit I guess it had a little bit more of a spice to it, I guess. But yeah, those two places were fantastic, and they're great finds here in Utah. And then I was able to find, while I was here at the grocery store, Three Musketeers has a new flavor that is a birthday cake kind of flavor. And I'm not the biggest fan of artificial birthday cake flavor. It usually just doesn't work well for me, but I was curious because Three Musketeers usually doesn't do different flavors that often. I don't even remember when they've done one before. So I was interested to try it, and it was honestly just okay. It was like kind of a bland birthday cake flavor, and it really didn't do much to make me like Three Musketeers any more than just like an okay candy bar. So yeah, but it was just, it's whatever, you know. If you like the original Three Musketeers, you probably won't really like this one much more.
See, I keep wanting birthday cake flavored things to actually taste like birthday cake, but they never do. It's always disappointing.
I think it's hard. It's a hard flavor to capture. But I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of generic birthday cake anyway, so maybe that's where my problem lies.
Okay, let's move on to what we've been playing. Jacob, I heard you got your hands on Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yes, I have, and I unfortunately don't have a whole lot to say just yet. It is a massive game, both in terms of the game itself and in terms of how well it did its opening week of release. I mean, in the headlines today were saying it had the biggest launch for any piece of entertainment in history in terms of money made, and that's what you get from a Rockstar game, a company that makes also the Grand Theft Auto games, and just spend 7 or 8 years making a game, and the results are always something spectacular in some way. And Red Dead Redemption 2 is a Western set in 1899. It's an open world game where there's a massive map. You can explore every nook and cranny. And the game, if you just focus on the story and avoided exploring, avoided subplots, avoided side quests, avoided optional things just to have fun and character customization, it's still a 60-hour game at its core. So I'm only a few hours into it. I'm still at the point of the game where it's still keeping me on a tight leash. It's still teaching me all of its systems. It's still teaching me how to ride and care for my horse, how to dress and bathe, how to go hunting to feed my camp of fellow outlaws, how to engage in combat, how to take care of my guns, how to interact with the world. It's pretty much Cowboy Simulator the game. Each animation is rendered like in beautiful realism. So your character does not when your character goes to open a drawer, it's not like a video game where the drawer opens quickly and all the stuff in it goes into your pockets. It is a game where your character has a full animation for opening the drawer, a full animation for reaching in, taking what's in there, putting it in his pocket. When you loot a dead body someone you killed, it's not just walking over and getting ammo. It's you go down the body, you lift it up, you pat it down, and this may seem frustrating, and I was frustrated for a little bit at first, but I started getting into the game's rhythm. I started realizing that it wants me to take my time. It wants me to value each action I take. It's not like I can get into a massive gun battle and hang around, get all the goods, and run away and be fine. It wants me to say, how much time do I want to spend over these dead bodies and hoping nobody sees me and goes to running at the marshal, because that can happen. But like I said, I'm still early enough that the game still teaches me how to play. It is still... And in the 5 or 6 opening hours where it's saying, here are the many, many things you need to know to actually enjoy and appreciate Red Dead 2. But I'm on board. Like, Red Dead 1 is probably if not my favorite, in my top 3 favorite games of all time. And I'm always up for whatever Rockstar wants to cook up. I know they've been in the headlines recently for some really unfair labor practices, making their workers crunch in ways that are very controversial. And that's always in my mind when I'm seeing how complex and beautifully made this game is. So I'm hoping that the amount of attention this game is getting only widens that attention. So Rockstar and other companies take notice and say we can create games of this quality and treat our employees like human beings as well. So I've been dealing with that moral quandary. But on a other note, a very different game. I played Jackbox Party Pack 5. I think I've talked about the Jackbox games in the podcast before. They're made by the people who made the old Jack games, the old trivia games from the 90s, 2000s. But now they make sort of these variety packs of various mini games that you can play with your phone on any video game console. So you don't need controllers. All you need is a PlayStation, an Xbox, a PC, or a Nintendo Switch. You fire up one of these volumes of games, and everybody at the party, or everybody at the gathering can pull up their phone and they can play on their screen or on their laptop or on their tablet. And sometimes it's trivia games, sometimes it's like drawing games, very silly, very funny, sometimes outrageous and offensive by design. But I've saved so many parties with Jackbox, and Jackbox Party Pack 5 is another one that seems to be a winner. The early winner so far is a game where you have robot rap battles, where a Mad Libs style thing asks you to name like a celebrity or name an action, name a day of the week, then it writes a partial rap rhyme for you if you have to finish. Then your robots rap at each other using those robot Siri voices. So it's very, very silly. And since you know who you're rapping against in the rap battle, you can make it very personal and very cutting, and everybody had a really good time. So those are the two games I've been playing this week.
Very cool. And it is crazy how much money like Red Dead made in the first weekend, right? First weekend made $725 million.
It's insane.
That's
but it's also a $60. It's a $60 game, so it's hard to compare to movies in that way. Probably sold as many tickets as a Marvel movie did, but
yeah, I wanted to bring that up because a lot of people say that video games are overtaking movies in user numbers, and that might be true with mobile games. But like a game like that, if you do the math, I think that's about 11 million sold or something. 11, 12 million sold. If you do the math on like how many people went and saw Avengers Infinity War on opening weekend, I think it's like 43 million. So it's not quite there yet. But it's definitely growing. That's insane. I mean, it's definitely more money. I mean, Avengers Infinity War, the average ticket price is much less than you can buy a video game for. So it's, $257 million was the opening 3-day weekend for that. But yeah, so you would recommend Red Dead? Like, I feel like, judging from what people are saying online, well, first of all, I don't love Westerns, first of all, so it's probably not for me. But it seems like it's slower, a lot slower than the first one.
Yeah, it definitely really leans into the idea this is the Old West. Guns are slower, movement is slower, getting around is slower. Everything, the prices of things are way different than you'd expect because a penny matters in 1899. I would recommend, if you're a fan of Grand Theft Auto, you're a fan of the first Red Dead, if you like Rockstar's open world games, it is a definite must buy. I recommend you go out and buy it. You will find something to appreciate here. If you're on the fence, if you've never played Grand Theft Auto, if you're intrigued, I go to YouTube. I would find a channel, a Let's Play channel from IGN or GameSpot or Giant Bomb or a trusted video game website who's not some annoying streamer, and watch them play for a bit. Like, watch with some commentary and see what they have to say. Watch it in motion for a little bit and decide, is this worth it to me? Is it something I will enjoy? I think it's the best way to discover if you want to play a game is read a review, but also go to YouTube and find the resources of people who can show you a game in motion and can provide you the insight as to whether or not it's a game for you.
Very cool. Ben, what have you been playing?
I just wanted to give a quick shout out to another podcast called Halloween Unmasked. And this is an 8-part podcast that is hosted by film critic Amy Nicholson, who I've got to know a little bit over the years being out here in LA. She's a really great writer and a very good podcast host. She hosts a show called Unspooled with Paul Scheer, where they go through the top 100 movies on the AFI list. But Halloween Unmasked is all about John Carpenter's Halloween, and it actually gets into a little bit the new Halloween movie as well. I just wanted to point this out in case, big Halloween fans, since I guess by the time people are listening to this, it's practically going to be Halloween. But if you're looking for something to binge listen, I would highly recommend this 8-part podcast series. It's great. It has tons of interviews with John Carpenter and Jamie Lee Curtis and David Gordon Green and Danny McBride and Nick Castle. And I mean, like, anybody who's been associated with the Halloween franchise, any big players in it, basically. And it's just a really in-depth exploration of what that movie meant back in the day and what it means now and how the fandom has persisted. And there's a lot of really interesting insights in there. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Halloween Unmasked.
Yeah, so that's the other side of the coin from my recommendation of Eli Roth's The History of Horror, which probably spends, 7 minutes on Halloween. This spends like 8 hours?
I mean, I'm not sure how long each of the episodes are. They probably range from like 30 to 40 minutes or something. But yeah. Yeah.
So if you want your deeper dive, head on over there. But we have reached the end of today's Slash Film Daily. You can find this podcast published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, peter@slashfilm.com, and please leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention the email on the air. Please go to our iTunes page, write us a review, give us 5 stars. Tell your friend, spread the word. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hey, Peter, do you know what time it is?
Jacob's voice when he says that is so menacing.
I loved HT's description of it last week, where she just imagined him like peering from around the corner. Saying...
Well, it is time to read from the gargantuan book of Insult, Offense, and Effrontery by Louis A. Safian. I've randomly opened up to a page. This is the juvenile delinquent section. All right, who wants to have a great truth about them unearthed first?
I'll step forward.
Hey, Peter, you're playing a nice little game of hopscotch. The only problem is you're playing with real scotch.
What?
Wait, I don't get it.
Because I'm a juvenile delinquent and I'm drinking. I don't.
Oh, that's gotcha.
You're drunk.
Oh,
well, yeah.
I see.
Well, HT, you're an honor student. You're always saying, yes, Your Honor, no, Your Honor.
Oh.
Ah.
And Brad, he may be visiting his girlfriend, but he would rather steal hubcaps than third base.
Whoa.
Oh.
Harsh.
I'm going to read this one just as it says. I'm not changing this at all, I promise. Hey, Ben, I hear you're very careful about your health. You only smoke filter-tipped marijuanas.
Marijuanas? Okay.
Hey, Chris, a good thrashing might get the wild oats out of you.
All right, I'll take that under advisement.
I just don't understand in what situation are these supposed to be used? Like, are you like
This
like...
situation. They're for this very situation to read on the podcast.
So.
The person who wrote this was like, someday a daily film news podcast will read these and make fun of my jokes.
We have to figure out how to use them in battle rap.
Okay. Jacob, pick one last one. We need to leave on a high note here.
All right. Open the book to a random page. Oh, I'm on entertainers.
Oh, okay.
Who wants this last one?
I'll take it.
Hey, Brad, after your performance, it gave you the off key to the city.
Oh, boy.
Peter, you can't ask for a more of a high note than that.
Oh!